Welcome to Global Azure Spain. Become a contributor to Microsoft Docs, hosted by Cheryl Adams and William Assaf. We want to take a moment to thank our local sponsors for helping us put this together. Welcome to our presentation, Become a Contributor to Microsoft Docs. I am Cheryl Adams, a senior content developer in the Sql Docs team. My area of focus is high availability, installations, backup, and restore. William?
Thanks, Cheryl. I'm William Assaf. I'm also a senior content developer on the Sql Docs team. I'm over articles on SQL performance, big data clusters, Polybase, Azure Synapse Analytics, and Azure SQL Database. I'm really looking forward to this presentation because you in the technical community are our target audience for this talk. Thanks, back to you, Cheryl.
Thank you. We're both members of the Sql Docs team. We often end up working more with other product teams than with each other. So it's so nice when we get to work together on a presentation like this. Let's get started. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to introduce DevRel. We're going to cover some tips and tricks in MS Docs that you might not be aware of. And most importantly, how to contribute to Microsoft's open source Docs as code in GitHub and what you need to know. First thing you'll need to know is that you'll need a GitHub account to contribute, if you don't already have one. Throughout the presentation, feel free to add your questions to the chat at any time, and our moderator will answer them as time allows. We're the Sql Docs team, internally and affectionately named Rogue One. And when we're not violating multiple copyright laws with this image, we support tens of thousands of articles about SQL Server. We work with product groups and program managers for everything SQL Server, including all of its various flavors of Azure, as well as Azure Synapse Analytics and the technologies under that umbrella. We also cover content for data platform tooling like SSMS and Azure Data Studio. But we're just one content team, and today we are talking about all of Microsoft Docs for all of the technologies. A bit about our mission statement. Hundreds of employees in content and learn at Microsoft. In short, we have two missions. We want to enable students, job seekers, and workers online with great content and build an active community of contributors. We want to ensure that we offer a breadth and depth of content to those audiences in need. Well, the second goal is why we are doing this presentation today. We want to communicate specifically how you can be a part of a quality Microsoft Docs experience. Microsoft Docs aren't Wikipedia. It is not open to all edits, but we do have hundreds of thousands of articles we want to embrace with the wisdom of you, the user in the technical community, to help us maintain a level of quality. Opening the docs up to external contributors is exactly how we scale. What is DevRel? In a greater role, DevRel is a team that involves activities that connect developers, in-house manufactured goods and services with you, the external users. DevRel ensures that products establish a good, continuous relationship with external developers through mutual communication. It involves documentation, but also reference documentation on how to call APIs and code samples. In other companies, it may look like community management, issue reporting, triage, release notes, focus groups, and public interaction. Your favorite video game, for example, has DevRel folks to send and receive communication with the public about bug reports, troubleshooting, patch notes, discussion, and even mods. Tips and tricks. Where it makes sense, the same doc might include different information about different versions of the product mentioned. We may use the same article with various versions of content for Windows versus Linux, or different releases of SQL Server, or different releases of Azure implementation of SQL Server. On the bottom left is a code snippet of Markdown showing how one article might display different content depending on the version requested. If a doc doesn't look quite right because of a version-specific detail, take a look at the version you're in. You'll see this in the URL or in the header of the article if it's got a version-specific content. That version drop-down list in the top left-hand corner may come in handy, and it also affects the table of contents by including or excluding certain articles. Sometimes we'll handle versioning via tabs inside the document, the Applies To row at the top of the article, or the colorful note boxes to make sure you know what SQL platform or version the article covers. Please note that for content that is specific to an older version of SQL Server, we still have access to that old content, even though some of it is offline docs only. And while we support content for all supported versions of SQL Server, just a friendly reminder that SQL 2012 extended support ends next summer in July of 2022. Just to give you a map around navigating specific docs and some of the features we have here without explaining every button. The bookmark button allows you to save links and important reference docs. This may be useful to folks like students who work on a lot of different machines and don't have access to browser bookmarks. You'll see two search boxes. The first right at the top searches the entire technology stack that you're in. For example, Azure. The table of contents on the left covers many different articles, and it is here that it's best to search for titles inside a given table of contents. On the right, you'll see the navigation for the document itself. Those header links are linkable directly. If you want to send a colleague a link to a heading specifically, you can hover over the heading and see the link graphic appear and copy the URL with the page anchor appended. Speaking of Management Studio, not a lot of people are still aware of this, but when you have any text highlighted, and if you hit F1 in SSMS, assuming your workstation has access to the internet, the browser should bring you right to the corresponding article for the word of the syntax you highlighted. For example, if you have selected Help preference of Open in Browser, this will bring you directly to the Microsoft Docs online article, in this case for the Dynamic Management view. If you hit F1 or something highlighted and it doesn't bring you to a specific article or to a different article than you expected, that might actually be a doc issue, and that's something you could file an issue for. If your work environment is behind an air-gapped network, and there are many reasons, including Microsoft Department of Defense project, or if you work in a high security environment like a nuclear power plant, you can download version-specific docs offline through SSMS. Our documentation is actually a strategic advantage against competitors. There are very large organizations, including public sector like the Department of Defense, and large private sector companies at the top of the Fortune list that want their development environments internal and secure from the public internet. In the case of Microsoft's documentation for SQL Server and Power BI, as well as Azure and all sorts of other products, our documentation can easily be downloaded periodically and hosted internally to those environments so that they can get the best out of both worlds, a secure network for development and access to fresh product documentation. Let's move forward with how to contribute.
Thanks, Cheryl. So, how do you contribute to Microsoft documentation? There's three main ways to give us feedback. The first is to use the feedback option. This used to be called the connect items, you might remember a few years ago. The second is to use Git issues. And since this whole thing is inside GitHub, The third is to create a pull request yourself, just as if you were contributing to any other open source project. Contributing can be done easily through the browser without having to learn Git bash or install anything, without having to know what a fork or a clone or a push or a pull is. If you've already worked with Git or GitHub and you're familiar with pull requests and remote repositories, then you can do that. And later, we'll talk about how this process works behind the scenes. But in the case of Microsoft documentation, and in the case of SQL Server, which the team that we represent, a lot of DBAs aren't familiar with Git. A lot of system engineers aren't familiar with Git, and that's not a problem. Anyone can help easily using the browser only. We even have a step-by-step tutorial at this URL here to guide you through the process of creating a PR. We're obviously going to demo that today as well. By contributing to Microsoft documentation for any product technology, you can be a part of the community that helps to edit docs that everyone at this conference uses. We'll talk about the contributor designation on top of the article, where we average around 16 million views a month. And you can do this entirely inside the browser with nothing to install. You're about to get an inside peek at the process behind Microsoft's Docs as Code approach. Content teams like ours across all technologies integrate with product teams, join their support reviews, their team meetings, coordinate on release schedules. We work with them. So let's walk through it. So to be clear, support issues don't belong in document feedback. Similarly, the product feedback channel is not for support issues as well. The feedback options we're about to discuss are not Microsoft support, and they have no SLA for response time. If you're having a problem or unexpected behavior or an outage, contact Microsoft support or your support partner. We triage incoming issues and PRs from GitHub. And if it sounds like what you have is a support issue, your issue will likely be closed with a polite message and some useful links. Most docs, though, that get attention are to request something that is outdated or missing or wrong. So a request to add something that would have helped prevent an error or an outage. Those are good. Those are good issues and pull requests to bring up in our docs. So if you've got an idea to improve docs, you have three options. The first is if you have product feedback or suggestions or reproducible bug reports, that actually doesn't belong in the docs system. That's for support, or it's for your feedback tool here. If you've been around a few years, you might remember the Connect system with Connect items. A few years ago, those were all migrated to feedback.azure.com. That's the place now for comments and suggestions for products. That's external to us on the docs teams, but that's where a lot of great usability and bug reports come from, and it's open to the public. And to give feedback on a product on any page in Microsoft documentation, you can use the This Product button you see at the bottom of the page. So this is the SQL Server page for feedback.azure.com. There's one for all sorts of different technology areas inside Microsoft Docs, where you can submit comments or suggestions and then vote on other people's ideas. You might see a lot of these on social media for when someone has a really good suggestion and they want to get the product team's attention with lots of votes in its favor. You can see there's a dark theme for SQL Server Management Studio item in there. The SQL Server folks are hoping we get that one day. So let's say that you've got a documentation issue to suggest. Think of this as letting us know, hey, something's wrong, or something's missing, or something could be improved. You go fix it. We have goals to address these in a timely manner, but we'll be honest, issues are triaged and might take days or weeks to get a satisfactory resolution. Not all issues become a documentation change. So to create an issue, go to the This Page button in the little gray box at the bottom of any article in Microsoft Docs. That will lead you to a new issue screen. Throw your comments in here and then hit Submit New Issue. You'll give it a title, you'll give it some comments and things like that, but we'll take it from there. And if you weren't aware, by the way, GitHub also has a dark mode. It's actually very nice. If you're not familiar with it, when you can change this when you're logged in and you go to your profile page, click that little button, and then a kitty cat appears. Also, if you're an enthusiast for dark mode websites like I am, docs.microsoft.com has a dark theme too. Check out the footer in any Docs website, in any article to change your theme. Also, I hear dark mode may be coming to Microsoft Word and LinkedIn too, so dark mode enthusiasts celebrate. Okay, back to contributing though. Third option, you want a documentation issue to be fixed and you want to suggest the edits yourself. You can click on the edit button in the top right-hand corner of most articles. Some articles don't have this turned on because they're procedurally generated, but most articles do have this edit button. That leads you to the GitHub preview page for that article. From here, click the pencil button in the top right-hand corner in that top right header bar, and you see here boxed in red. That leads you to the actual Markdown code in a text edit box. So Markdown. Markdown is a lightweight text markup language created for formatting rich text, but with a plain text editor. GitHub has their own formal implementation of Markdown called GitHub Flavored Markdown. Many different online websites use Markdown for their content, including GitHub, like GitLab, Reddit, Stack Exchange, Bitbucket, Drupal, and more. So you might actually already be more familiar with Markdown than you think. Make your changes here. If you're not familiar with Markdown, it's pretty easy to understand once you get rolling. Don't worry about it being perfect. The content team will always review your content submission, potentially tweak it to Microsoft standards before it's merged live. There are plenty of resources online for the basic Markdown syntax, but if you don't get something quite right, don't sweat it. You can use the preview changes button right here in red to preview the Markdown formatting. And then once you've made your changes, scroll to the bottom. Here you're going to have a chance to commit your changes. Enter your PR title and comments, give it a description, throw in the ping MSFT docs, or ping Microsoft Docs to just wave hi to us. We'll talk more about that later. You can also use that same hashtag on Twitter to say hi. Then choose the create a new branch for this commit and start a pull request button. Unlike some open source projects, we actually don't allow you to commit code to a live repository. Then you'll notice it gives a new branch a simple name. That's fine. Don't worry about that. If you're not familiar with GitHub terminology like branches and pull requests, don't worry. You don't have to be. Once you submit your pull request by clicking the green commit changes button, we'll take it from there and keep you updated as your pull request moves through the process. Your changes to the Markdown file will be proposed for merged, triaged, and then reviewed by the article's author and its reviewers. The content team for the article takes it from there, replies to the PR and comments, makes edits if necessary, and then eventually, potentially, merges the code in. You'll be notified along the way with feedback directly from one of us on the content team. Again, you can do all of this through your own tooling if you like. You can create your own fork, branch commits, push and pull requests. That's what we on the content teams do every day. But if you just want to use github.com like we're showing right here to handle the entire process for you, it's actually much easier. So here's what it will look like after you've submitted your pull request. Your pull request will open in an open status. You can see this one here is already merged. It has the purple merged bubble in the top left-hand corner, which means it's already been accepted and pushed into the next repository where it'll be merged into the live website. You can see what GitHub did here for you is to automatically, in the background, create a fork of the repository, create a branch automatically, and here with Hiroshi's name, patch 297. And then the pull request includes here with the red arrow, commit, which is in the pull request log right there. Pull requests can include many commits for many different files. The pull request log contains both automated and manually created messages. Automation for the merge engines, all the commits, and any conversation or notes from anyone who's been assigned. You'll receive an email anytime anyone uses your username with the @ symbol, and you can respond in conversation at the bottom here with the comment button. Once your pull request is created, both you and Microsoft can review the changes you're suggesting in the pull request. Click on the Files Changed tab to see an in-browser differential. Red is the old code, green is the new, and the changed characters are highlighted. And here you can see someone has suggested a very easy typo fix, real easy to approve. If you still want to make more changes to the file, you can issue another commit to the pull request. Simply click the three dots right there in the top right-hand corner and then click Edit File. You can then submit another change to the same open pull request. After you've submitted your pull request, you can sit back. We got it from here. And we'll let you know if we have more questions and with any status updates. So those are your three options: product feedback, GitHub issue, GitHub pull request. Now, what's most helpful to Microsoft and what gives you contribution credit? That third option, the pull requests. That's actually what we want to see most. And after your pull request is in, you can say hi to us on Twitter so we can recognize you as a contributor there as well. If you contributed via a pull request, we merge your pull request into the document. You'll get your GitHub picture and account link to your profile at the top of the document. The folks listed here are those inside Microsoft and external who all submitted pull requests for the article. Note that you only get your name and logo on an article for a pull request, not for an issue. So if you're not sure how the article should change, give it a shot. If it's not quite right or formatted perfectly, don't worry. We'll adjust that, but at least it gets fixed. For images and graphics and charts and things like that, we actually have designers and artists that we work with to get images updated in a standardized way, so there's no need to edit images yourself. Finally, capitalization is tough. Various features and products inside Microsoft, how to capitalize them is one of the most nuanced bits there is about publishing. Marketing usually wins marketing always wins these arguments, regardless of how a product documentation evolved throughout its development process. Just had a big PR come through, for example, where someone was making hundreds of changes to capitalization in hundreds of different articles, about half of which were right. So this task is tricky enough when you have information directly from the inside sources. So we'll handle that part. But yes, if you spot inconsistencies between marketing content and documentation content and training content, you should know we're regularly discussing and working on that stuff internally, but don't be afraid to point something out. For example, product names and feature names and phrasing are difficult to get just right and are some of the trickiest when a generic word is part of a product name. So just because we have a product called Azure SQL Database doesn't mean that every word database is now capitalized. The same thing for firewall or pool. This is even more difficult for our international partners and customers because capitalization often means that a product or a service name shouldn't be translated or should be translated in a specific way. But a lowercase or a common noun for the same term should be translated. Inconsistency in capitalization confuses translators and customers. So that consistency is important. And it's at the core of our brand voice, which is above all to be simple and human. And if we can do better to meet that goal, let us know. One last bit about contributions for localization issues, such as a translation issue. If you've got a translation issue to raise, those are actually submitted all by email. This process actually changed in the last year or so. You can download an Outlook email template at this link right here, aka.ms.docsite.lock-feedback. Submit your feedback in any language. It will be translated and routed to the correct localization team. If you've got a technical issue with an article and you're most comfortable submitting your issue in another language besides English, no problem. Instead of creating an issue or a pull request in English, you can use this email template as well. It will be translated and then passed along to the proper content teams, like our Sql Docs team. Either way, thanks for contributing to Microsoft documentation and making docs better for everyone, everywhere. So now that you've seen how you can use GitHub to contribute to docs, let's briefly show some inside baseball and talk about how we use GitHub to host Microsoft documentation. It might surprise you to learn that Microsoft Docs are not edited in Microsoft Word, but rather in code in Markdown or YAML, as we discussed. We spend most of our day using Visual Studio Code or Azure Data Studio, pretty much the same thing, to edit Markdown files. We also have other tools to help with automated link checking, syntax formatting, bulk updates, and a series of include files to tokenize things like product names. We have a rich set of metadata for each article. We do pay attention to how articles perform in terms of search engine optimization and traffic patterns and trends, all driven through Azure Analytics and Custo queries. We try to improve poorly performing articles. We use many metrics to track the performance of an article, including, for example, if you copy text from the article, that's actually good. Or if you click through, scroll, dwell, the same kind of metrics that any website uses to measure the performance of a website page without capturing any personal information or wider tracking information. For big article updates, we actually have systems to handle release branches for when we want to work on documentation for months, but then release a product all at once, like during a keynote at Ignite. So here's some behind the scenes on how Microsoft Docs in Git works, specifically in GitHub, where all Microsoft documentation is managed. If you're new to Git and don't understand this, don't worry. As we'll explain to contributors in the community, all this is managed for you. But here's the basic GitHub workflow for those of you who want to learn. This may be a bit of a deep dive, but for those of you who already work in GitHub, this might be interesting. A repository like SQL Docs, and again, this applies to any docs, including Azure Docs and other things. This is where the source is housed and where the website engine pulls Markdown to present the live pictures to you on websites. A fork is a copy of the repo associated to your account in GitHub. We each on the Docs teams have created forks of each repo in our own GitHub accounts. A clone is a copy of a fork that's brought down locally. The files are copied to your workstation so you can make edits. To tell the two apart, a common convention is to reference your remote fork as origin and the codebase you eventually push to called upstream. These are called remote names or remotes, and these are just common naming conventions. You can choose any name. You'll have an origin and an upstream for each repo you work in. When you go to make changes to a file or add or remove files, you'll create a working branch that is relevant to just the chunk of changes you'll be making. You'll want a branch to contain only the changes for a specific feature or issue you're addressing so that it can be treated as a block of changes to go back up the stream. Your work goes into a branch, and here the branch is to fix an issue, and we name it with an ISO date appended to the front. When you're done first, the branch is committed locally to your clone. Then it's pushed to your origin in github.com, the fork of the code in your GitHub account. Now it's off your computer. Then you issue a pull request asking Microsoft Docs repository to accept changes from your repository so that your changes can be merged from your fork into the main repository. To explain things a little closer to the reality of how they work internally, we actually have two repositories for every repository in Microsoft Docs. You don't have to worry about this if you're submitting pull requests outside. The preview repo is only for internal Microsoft use. The SQL Docs repository or the Azure Docs repository drives the website, but like true professionals, we don't develop against production. We only develop in our preview repository, which is not visible to the public and allows us to work in and preview the merged state of all of our changes in an actual live repository. This build process to the live website occurs usually twice a day and is gated by a team of build reviewers. But when you use github.com to submit changes in the browser, or you create pull requests using your own tools, you don't have to worry about that. Your workflow and all the validation necessary occurs inside the public SQL Docs repository or Azure Docs repository or whatever repository you happen to be working in. And you'll know that, by the way, by the article that you're editing. And again, this is the same docs as code pattern applies to all Microsoft technology. in all repositories in Microsoft Docs. So again, you can use github.com for all of this, but if you're interested in learning more about Git and GitHub, here's some materials from Microsoft Learn that would be helpful along the way.
What's new in Sql Docs? In February 2021, we introduced dynamic recommended content in the footer of many Microsoft Doc articles. The links in the content are determined by a machine learning solution based on a model that describes customer behaviors with our document set. We've seen really positive metrics on tracking traffic to recommended files so far. We hope this will be helpful in customers finding exactly what they need. We hope that you'll continue your journey here at Global Azure by attending Innovate Today with Azure SQL. Join us to learn how to build an effective cloud database management strategy and see how you can accelerate your organization's data, migration, modernization, and development with Azure. We appreciate you and thank you for attending Become a Contributor to Microsoft Docs. We are now open to your questions and feedback in our live chat session. We also wanted to take an opportunity to thank our local sponsors. But most importantly, we want to thank you, members of the community, for attending Global Azure. Thank you.